Welcome to our webinar on solar installations on the farm with Richard of KCP Energy. And Richard, I will hand things over to you to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. My name is Richard Fleck. I work with KCP Energy. We're located out of Calgary. We've done multiple projects across the province, a lot of them in Canmore, a lot of commercial, residential. So we're fairly diversified, not tied to one specific area. My focus in the last few years has been the agriculture community, and it's been a varied conversation. There's been some hesitation, to move forward. Other parts of the country have embraced solar probably a little bit ahead of where we're at with our province, and I think there's varied reason. My background is I've got several years in oil and gas. And I walked into that downturn like many other of my friends and cohorts and faced a new reality that our province was changing. The landscape of energy was changing. I share the opinion that it is not a single source solution to the energy. And I don't like to use the word crisis, but I think in this instance, and as we get along further in our talk here, there probably is a little more urgency than there had been in previous years. I just talked with Marie about the current news cycle, and if any of you follow the news as closely as I do, obviously the landscape of energy has changed for various reasons. So our approach is to try to create a kind of a bilateral approach. I don't think we're ever going to get away solely from fossil fuel usage, but there's definitely an opportunity, not just from a climate initiative standpoint, but for an economic standpoint, to make the decision to move forward with an alternative solution. The landscape of energy, unfortunately, has now forced us to have different conversations. So we work closely with a lot of large scale farms. The last couple of years, they've been fortunate to have, power pricing in the range of, 5 to 5.5 cents a kilowatt. Some of the larger farms chose to go on a floating rate the last cycle. And if any of you guys were one of those, I apologize and I feel bad because I think a lot of people got some surprises in the mail when their invoices came. We talked to some farms that were paying 13, 14 cents for their base cost. And I don't know that that's going to be the norm, but again, it should tell us that is potentially where we could be looking down the road, possibly not tomorrow, but I think in the near future, not as short as we originally thought, we're going to be certainly seeing a larger pressure on our energy production. So this is the first slide that we have. Basically, it's fairly simplistic. If you can go to the next one for me, Marie.
Mm.
So solar, as most people understand it, is not overly complicated. As farmers in agriculture, we understand that we depend on the sun for a lot. It obviously grows our crops and helps everything else in our world. And solar, it obviously is a large benefit of that. We are in God's country as far as Canada goes. They call it the Bible Belt of Sun near Medicine Hat and Brooks area. Even into Edmonton, we get more sunshine than anywhere else in Canada. In Calgary, we get right around 333 days a year. And that is a resource, as far as I'm concerned, that we should be utilizing, no different than it would be if we had oil sitting on our land or natural gas. We all have the opportunity to benefit from the exposure of the sun that we get, and not just in the summer months, through the course of the winter, as cold as they get, we're still able to produce a fairly significant amount of power that'll help, obviously lessen some of those costs that we have. So your basic solar system, obviously your solar panels will convert that energy to DC or direct current, and from there we flow it down. Any of the power that you're generating during your daytime, if you're using appliances or equipment on your land, dryers, or that energy that you're producing is actually being used by your equipment. So it's not going back into the grid and then you're buying it back. In the summer months, one of the farms we spoke with yesterday, we built him basically a prototype of what his energy outlook would look like. And pretty much from June to the end of September, he was overproducing from what his usage would be. So then when he walks into those fall months, he's got a fairly substantial credit that will be reflective in his bill. So at the end of the process, we do install a bidirectional meter, which means anything in excess that is overproduced will then be pushed back into the grid. That'll be measured, and then that's where your credit system will come from. On the tail end of this, we do have some dialogue on batteries and generators. There's a lot of questions we've got of late of batteries. It's been a special interest of mine because it seems so practical to do. Unfortunately, my opinion, we're not there yet for large scale battery production or battery storage. There are some companies on a global scale, and a couple of them are based out of Alberta, that have been recognized at some of the larger shows for some unique, I guess, advances in that field. And I don't think we're far away in order to get those batteries. But from our standpoint, from a financial payback model, they're not overly practical. It doesn't mean they can't be done. Just from a financial return, it's probably not the most beneficial of yet, unless you actually require them. You can go to the next slide, please. So the benefit of Wood Alberta, we can sell that energy back as a microgen, and they do have, obviously it's a peak benefit for users that will obviously overproduce in those months, as I mentioned. And again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how the actual system will work, because it's fairly simple. The power that's generated will go through our system. We obviously have inverters that will help disperse that energy. Will run right into your home or your office or your building. You'll utilize that energy. Everything then will be credited back. Certain sizes of systems are remunerated differently, but the overall you will receive a credit on everything that you overproduce. Marie, next slide. One of the questions we get asked a lot is how big of a system should I be putting in on my farm, on my property? My answer is simple, and it's not because we're trying to sell or oversell a system. The simple answer is I would put absolutely every piece of panel I could on my property if it was mine, and I'll just use round numbers. If I'm using 100 units a month or a year, I would want to put a system in that's going to produce exactly that amount. So our payback models vary depending on where you are in the province, what your rate class is. But on an average, we can now comfortably say that we're in between that 7 and 10 year payback model. Again, with the energy prices creeping up, that conversation's gotten a lot easier to have from a financial standpoint. When we're talking 12, 13, 14 years, it's a little bit more challenging to try to see that far out. But we've now seen new contract pricing come into the market. I met with a gentleman yesterday. His new 3-year is I think he said 7.4 cents a kilowatt, up from 5.2. So if I'm him, I'm looking at almost a 40% increase from my last billing contract cycle to this one. And I think we can all agree that moving forward, we can't expect it to slow down or cap. Unfortunately, Alberta does not have hydro, so we can't depend on that. I don't see nuclear coming in as an option in any time soon. So obviously, we're going to have to look to our resources that we have. Natural gas, obviously, is going to be our largest aspect in order to produce power. Right now, I think the last numbers I looked at, we still have 36% of our power is generated by coal. Obviously, that number is going to be reduced dramatically as we get federal pressure to reduce our emissions, of course. With the price of natural gas, and for those of you who've been following it, it has obviously increased dramatically over the last little while. I think the last number I saw was at $9, up from $2. So again, those are all going to be reflective of what our forward pricing that we can expect. We looked at the latest round of Alberta forward purchasing for 23 and 24. It is 2 to 3 cents higher than what it is currently now. So I think those of us that are in contracts, we're going to be okay, for the next little bit. But you need to plan ahead for your next contract cycle, that there's going to be substantial increases that are coming. So obviously, Calgary has got, as you can see by this map, we've got substantial amount of sunshine. As we move farther north, obviously it dissipates, but it is still beneficial. And in places like Ontario, in some of their provinces, they don't have the sort of production that we have, and financially it still makes sense. Obviously, it makes more sense as the number as our dollar increases for that price per kilowatt. And again, I strongly feel that it's going to move that way. So when we're building a system, we use obviously some forecasting data that we have, and it's historical data for over the last 10 years. So we're not guessing. but we can build a fairly accurate model that'll show you for your area what you can expect for production. So again, you know, on one of the farms that we spoke with yesterday, they use 1 million kilowatts a year. And they said, well, how much do we have to spend in order to put a system in? And quite honestly, the answer is simple. If you want to put $100,000 on solar on your property, that's fine. You can do that. And in 7, 8, 9 years, that $100,000 will be paid for. And that'll run for, obviously, it could go indefinite. The panels have an extremely long shelf life, you know, past 30 years, they'll still be producing at, you know, 85 to 90%. So if you put $100,000 in, you're going to have that paid off, and that system will pay for itself several times over. If you can, you want to upsize it to the maximum you can. So if you can spend $1 million on solar, our financial snapshot shows the same payback model will apply. You'll still have a 7 to 9 year payback. But in that time, now you'll have $1 million worth of solar paid for, which will then continue to generate power for the next 25 to 30 years plus and beyond. So it sounds kind of like a sarcastic answer, but our suggestion is to maximize everything that you can. We can overproduce by a slight amount, but Alberta holds us fairly accountable not to overproduce. Otherwise, we cannot apply for those microgen agreements. So when we visit a site, we'll look at what the usage is. If there are some potential for growth, we'll identify that. We'll create a pricing model, basically look at what your rate class is, how many site ADs you have. Obviously, if you have pivots, and I'm sure we have people from all over the province, some of those areas are heavy in pivots. Pivots have a little bit better advantage for payback because they're obviously only utilized for certain months of the year. So that leaves them dormant for usually about 8 months a year that we're able to generate energy and sell that energy back. So those are something, you know, that those particular farmers are looking fairly keen at, because again, the cost of running those pivots, especially in these hot months what we're forecasting are coming, is quite sizable. So again, when we're doing a forecast, there's really no guesswork. We have a fairly good, accurate, you know, picture of what it is that we're building. We will speak with the provider that you have. We have obviously to get release signed. Some of the farmers are worried about giving us that information because they're worried that we're going to find something proprietary. We're not looking to pay anybody's bills by any stretch, but it gives us permission to speak with, you know, Fortis or whoever else, and just identify what the usage is, what their rate class is, what their historical data has been, and then we build a system accordingly. So we can go to the next slide. Once we've identified that solar is a fit, and usually with rural properties, typically it is. Obviously with some residential, you know, we find that some of the higher users have roofs that are not appropriate, just not beneficial. They've got high bills and north-facing backyards, so that does not tend to work well. But on a rural, we're usually fairly able to get in and do a ground mount. In some cases, we've done on barns. There's really no limitations as long as we've got, you know, decent exposure. So we'll go in and complete that process. From then we'll apply for your microgen agreement. And again, it's not a complicated process as long as we're showing that we're maximizing what your usage is. And if we're under that 5,000 kilowatts, which is 5 megawatts, which is a fairly large, would be a fairly large solar program. Anything when you get to the utility scale, we typically do not get involved in that. We're only looking to supply to farms that are using the energy that they generate. We've got on here that it takes 1 to 2 weeks for approval. I think that number's been pushed back a bit because there has been, I would say, a little bit more interest and an uptick on solar applications, but it's still not anything that's unreasonable. Once that approval is granted to us, we'll do all the other permitting, and then we can start our installation process. And then that ends with the system being commissioned, and then you're generating power and using the power you're generating. Next slide, please. As far as the equipment, I spoke with one of our engineers at our office today. There are options to have systems on, like as you see on the lower left, that will actually move on their axis and follow the sun. We don't do a lot of them. I will certainly do one. And the reason a lot of people are not interested in those is strictly for the cost. It will obviously increase your production, but the cost of those types of systems seems to be a little bit more prohibitive for the people that we're trying to cater to. As far as equipment, we use a tier 1 grade system only. I can't specify the panels that we're using because, as everybody else is also experiencing, we have some supply chain challenges. That being said, the group that runs our procurement department has been very keen. We just completed a project that had 3,400 and change panels on a roof in Calgary for a commercial project. And given enough time, we can source those panels. For anything rural, we would probably try to source what's called a bifacial panel. And that picture on the lower right, if you can see, those panels on the back are blank. Those are not bifacial. The benefits of a bifacial, although it adds a slight amount to the cost, your production will increase proportionally higher than what the cost would be. And it definitely adds benefit. There was a study done out of the University of Waterloo. You can look it up online, and they've actually increased what they feel the production number is. But at the very minimum, you're going to get an extra 3 to 4%, which doesn't sound like a lot on an annual basis. But if you couple that, over 25 years, that adds a tremendous amount of production to your system over the lifetime of the system. So we're using a bifacial panel. So when we do get those cold summer months, which we're bound to have, and the snow has covered our properties, that reflective quality that comes off the snow will be reflected into the back of those panels, and the energy will be received there. So again, we get some pretty dark months in January and December. Although the production numbers are low, it still adds obviously to the overall production on an annual basis. So we want to try to make sure that we're maximizing that as much as possible. The inverters that we use, we've got a couple different types. We've tested them with several different vendors and suppliers. We were tasked with one of the energy companies to do a test site several years back, and we put a couple of different inverters and a couple of different types of panels as per their request, just to see if we could monitor, which equipment fared the best in the climate conditions that we have. So that's kind of the direction, and that basically is our deciding factor on equipment. But there are a lot of options out there, and without trying to say anything negative, just be very wary of getting a second class or a tier B panel. My dad always said and it applies to a lot of things, you get what you pay for. The tier 1s are not that much more expensive, but by the long stretch, by year 20, that's when you'll certainly notice a difference. Obviously, you're going to get degradation on any panel, but the higher quality panels will definitely have a better duration than some of the lower quality panels that are circulating in our market. Next slide, Marie. Again, anybody that has read the news as much as I have, and I promised Maria I would not get political, so I'm going to try to stay as bipartisan as I can. But our friend Justin Trudeau has made it very clear that he has a climate initiative that is strong, that he will not waver from. There's been some articles of late, and I challenge you to look for them if you can. He has made it a point to focus on agriculture specifically, high emission users, and he has mentioned in several speeches of late the province of Alberta. So what that means for us, I think if we can use forecasting as a word, I think the writing's on the wall that the decision right now is ours, the individuals, to decide what they want to do. But I think in the near future, immense pressure is going to be put on these specific high users to make different decisions as far as where their energy sources are. He speaks in one article, and I showed it to Marie earlier. He speaks in one article specifically about grain emissions and the amount of emissions that are used in certain farming applications. And he feels that the only way to offset some of these potential increases is to have a renewable source for energy. Obviously, wind is something else to look at. We have found in our homework, as many windmills as you see around our province, they're not as cost effective as a solar program would be. They tend to price out. We had one farmer that purchased some windmills used. They spent several $1 million on some used, and I deal with them quite often. Every time we drive by, they have 4 of them, and I've never seen more than 2 of them operating because the cost to repair them is so prohibitive. They just can't afford to go in and make those repairs. So obviously, looking at alternative energy sources, we feel that solar is probably by far the only option or the best option for secondary users to look at. The chart on the bottom, it just shows those transmission charges from the various providers. And if we look back, obviously, to 2004, when everybody thought we were in the heyday, we did have some flat years in 08 to 10. But, if you forecast a chart, it doesn't take anybody that's too business inclined to see if that chart is continuing to increase. In the next several years, we can anticipate further increases. The other concern that I have is our grid I don't believe it was built to handle this type of energy return. We have some large utility programs going in all across our province. That to me is one of the largest indicators of what we should be doing. Again, without telling people that they have to do solar, we've got large companies. I know Amazon has put $200 million into our market, and as much as he would like us to believe it's to show an energy offset, he selected Alberta because of the potential for solar generation, as well as the price of return on his solar. And obviously he's selling that, or they are selling that solar, that energy back at a lower price than a farm would be able to. But we are now faced with some potential issues with our grid being congested. The grid, if you can visualize it, it's very similar to what a train track would be. And once there's so many cars on the track, that's the end. So we have some farms that have been contemplating making this decision, for 18 to 24 months, and they're hemming and they're hawing. And we've just done some studies, and those decisions will be made for them shortly, whereas there will be no more capacity left on certain parts of that grid because we will reach capacity. If you look into North America, specifically into the States, there are several states now where people are trying to get onto the grid for local chargers for their car, and the grid is full. So you're only allowed to have obviously so much on there. So we want to try to avoid having those conversations with disappointed consumers or customers and saying, I wish I would have. Obviously, there's some hesitation from a financial aspect. That being said, we've done some modeling. The numbers, I guess, to say this, to try to not to sound verbose, some of the numbers that we are able to generate almost look too good to be true. And I say that tongue in cheek. So, we're very willing to have those numbers vetted. One of the larger projects that we looked at, they wanted us to deal with one of the major accounting firms here in Canada. We provided them the information that we thought was realistic. I would say, if anything, we're a bit more conservative even than we should be. And with those conservative numbers, we were still able to show a return on investment of between 12 and 15%. There's not too many investments that I found that can show me anything higher than a 12 to 15%. And that is basically your own investment. So when people say to us, well, we can't afford to do it, I just don't have the money, I don't look at it as an expense. I look at this as an investment, and you're basically investing in yourself. So, as a rural community, I think we've learned that anything that we can do ourselves or provide ourselves is something that we're going to utilize and benefit from. One of the farmers, I said, you don't farm out certain projects because you can do them yourself. If we had bubbling oil fields in the middle of our land, we would certainly go out there and cap it and put a pump on it and celebrate. We would jump up and down with joy because we've struck oil. Well, we have that as another resource in the sun. And it sounds a little bit coy, but we do. The energy that we can produce from the sun is no different than the energy we can produce from the ground. It's going to create that offset. And in the long term, it's going to save us a substantial amount of money, which is only going to continue to increase as time goes on. Next slide, please. The other benefit that we have currently is we have a CCA tax allowance. As of up until 2023, you are able to write off 100% as a depreciated cost of your system. So I'll use $1 million as a number, not that we need to spend that, but some of the larger farms are, they're $1 million application. So they can write off 23% of that, which will obviously reduce the overall cost, which helps the payback model obviously achieve that 7 to 9 years. That will be changing in 2024, where you can no longer write off the full amount in year one. Typically on a business, we're able to depreciate assets or costs at a term of about 10%. This gives us that tax allowance all at once. And again, as you can see from that chart, it is going to change year by year. The other thing that we don't have really in our slide that I want to speak on is the benefit of carbon credits. And the reason I'll speak on that now is if we're looking at an offset cost on an overall project, and I'll use $100 as a number. So if we have $100 that we're spending, we can write off 23% of that $100 or $23. In addition, we're going to generate carbon credits. Now, carbon credits are kind of new for the solar side. I know that there's been tilling credits that have been sold in Alberta for several years. The carbon credits now have, I would say, an attached value that is substantial. So in our estimations, and we're working with a group here in Alberta that we're partnering with, I was out with a gentleman yesterday and spoke to some farms. You know, in certain cases, they can receive up to $20,000 a year. Currently, we get to claim those credits for 8 years. There is the possibility that there's an application for an additional 5. But using that 8-year forecasting, we're projecting that those credits will therefore offset an additional 20 to 22% of the cost of the job. So if you couple those two numbers together, you're almost looking at a 50% reduction in the overall costs. So there have been rebate programs that have come into Alberta. We've had some fairly stern conversations with the government that is currently in power and previous governments. They're good programs when they were there. There was a lot of outstanding factors that kind of came into play with some of them. One of the largest one is your credits were forfeited if you received any provincial funding. So some of the farms were not interested in forfeiting their credits because we're not sure exactly what the value is going forward. We know today there's good money. A lot of people are thinking that dollar amount could increase. You know, as the carbon tax continues to increase, we're at $50 a ton now. I think the cap that Trudeau had mentioned was 170. So you can connect the dots on that. Those offsets are going to provide, you know, some monetary value down the road. So that is definitely something to consider moving forward. Next slide, please. So again, when we're doing forecasting, we're looking at that energy rate, and I put in there that 7.7 to 9 cents a kilowatt. I've had some pushback on that, but now seeing again as recently as yesterday, those numbers are realistic. So again, you can do your own math, but if we were at a 5.5 cents a kilowatt cycle for the last round, and we've now jumped to 7.2, we're now reducing our coal production, which is currently at 36%. And I believe the mandate is to get to 0. So we have to increase our natural gas production for energy. That energy rate is going to continue to increase. At what rate? I'm not sure. In our previous forecasting models, and I've been doing this now for several years, we were using a 2.5% escalator for power. What we've learned is that number was, I wouldn't even say conservative, because it wasn't realistic. We're now looking at 25 to 30% increases, and without trying to speak fear, that number will probably continue to trend forward. So other provinces, if we look at what other provinces are spending on power, it's substantially more than ours. We've had some benefits of some programs that the governments have sponsored, and I think they've removed some of those programs. So again, just being cautious, I think it's better to plan for some increases. I wouldn't say we're looking at a double, but in 10 years, I don't know what the energy landscape will look like, to be honest with you. I know that if I had a large farm that used a tremendous amount of energy, I would certainly look at that, because the best way to make money on any business is to cover your costs or reduce your overhead, and you're able to do that by capping the cost on your power. So the installation costs will vary, and they vary based on the equipment, based on where we're putting it, if it's a ground mount or if it's a roof mount. Alberta Treasury Branch is one of the banks that has shown, I would say, an interest in solar programs. They are offering some fairly aggressive interest offerings. I know in the residential, they were doing 15-year options for solar. Again, with interest rates, and I saw yesterday or this morning that we had a small bump in interest, but for the most part, money is still fairly reasonably. It's fairly cheap depending on where you go. But shop around. Like I said, Alberta Treasury Branch does have a solar specific program, and that's something you probably wanted to talk to your banks about. But there are, again, we touch on those carbon credits at the bottom, and that's something that we'd have to explore on a case by case basis. But there definitely is a monetary value, I would say substantial value attached to those credits. And go forward, there probably will be even more value. Next slide, please. These are two examples of farms. Don't quote me on these numbers. We have not updated them. Obviously, with the cost of steel, as everybody knows, we spoke to a farmer yesterday who was building a barn, and they delayed their production or their build by a year, and the cost of their steel went up 28% for the overall barn. We're unfortunately faced with some of those increases as well. Again, our group has been very diligent in trying to solidify good relationships. We're trying to obviously curb those increases as much as possible, but it would be remiss to think that we're not going to be susceptible to some of the increases that everybody else is having. So, and I don't see that trending down, unfortunately. If you watch the leadership in the United States and Canada, we seem to be in a little bit of a crisis for supply and various other things. So these numbers, again, as the cost of insulation may have increased, so has the cost of power. So the payback models are still very similar, if not even a little bit more favorable. But we can still show, as a rule, at least a 10 to 11% return on your investment. Which again, if you're dealing with the banks or any GICs, those numbers are fairly aggressive and they're fairly realistic, to be honest with you. And that's, if you have money or if you're tying up, that's something that you definitely would want to look at. This economics on this particular program was a 10-year payback. I believe now on that particular system, it's now probably closer to an 8. But we'll do it on a case-by-case basis and give you an idea of what you're looking at for payback model. Next slide, please. On a large farm, again, we're going to encourage those farms to maximize the size of their system. Again, just to reiterate, not that we're trying to oversell to the farms, but if you're using 100 units a year, you want to generate 100 units a year. You certainly can put in less. We would strongly suggest against it, only because the more power that you can offset from a usage standpoint is less power that you're going to have to generate on your go forward. So as power prices obviously continue to increase, you're going to want to be generating as much power as you can on your site. There are some options now for land usage. I know some of the farms were concerned about the usage of the land, and we're wasting acres. We've got some other solutions that we can offer that show some benefits, and I would say strong benefits in utilizing that land so it's not wasted. And I can share with you those on an individual basis going forward. Next slide, please. Again, this is kind of repeating ourselves, but in the infrastructure considerations, we definitely need to come and do a site visit. We can guess as good as possible without coming directly to site. By dealing with your provider, I can find out what your site ID is, what equipment that you have. Again, if you're dealing with somebody that is not asking these questions, just be very aware that you could get yourself in a situation where you've got some extra costs. An example is a large farm last year had entered into an agreement with a provider to put some solar in. Fortunately, we had a conversation with them before they made any commitments, and the farm was told they could put in 400 kilowatts larger than what the equipment they had on site could handle. That would have caused a tremendous amount of cost back to that farm. This particular site was in a Fortis territory. After we spoke to Fortis, they giggled and said, well, it would have been about a $300,000 upgrade for that farm to accommodate that system that they were recommending. So just make sure that all of the diligence is being done ahead of time before all the planning and applications are made. Make sure that your provider is having those conversations with the energy companies to look at your equipment and make sure that they know what they're doing. Obviously, wind loads is important too for both ground and roof. Again, going back to what you get, what you pay for, there was a system out near Lethbridge, and they went with whatever. I don't want to be unkind, but they made a decision, and I think they regret, because they were picking up panels off their neighbor's yard after their first small wind. And again, we're scratching their head as to how these things weren't properly mounted. It is important to do your homework and make sure that the installers have done work in that area, know how to measure those wind loads, that they're being engineered properly is the most important thing. And again, with maintenance, we kind of joke with the farms, there's not a lot of maintenance required. We do strongly recommend still that you do an annual check on your system, which we can provide. Other than washing the panels off, there's really not a lot of maintenance required. You want to make sure that they are running. We do provide a system that reports back to the user, which we monitor as well to see if there's any of the strings that have gone offline. But you'll want to have that system checked to make sure that nothing's frayed. If you've got animals in your farms, we know goats like to chew and climb and do everything else. So we try to strongly suggest that you don't allow goats around your thing, because they will have a contest who can jump the highest and shoot through it the quickest. So sheep are a good option. They like to sit and eat. So we've had lots of farms that have gone with that direction. But other than washing the panels off annually, there's really not a lot of maintenance because there's no moving parts. The inverters themselves are built for the climate, so they should cause no issues. But again, if there is any integrity issues with the system that we've installed, we're able to identify it fairly quick and have that rectified. Next slide, please. So again, to kind of summarize and tie up, obviously and I've spoken on this before, the system monitoring is something that we do provide. I'm not sure that every company provides a system, but encourage that you have this. You want to make sure that you're watching what your production is. We have some residential customers that look daily to see how much power they generated, more out of interest than anything, because it is quite remarkable on a sunny day like today, how much power even a small system can generate. So imagine a larger system living out in your field without having to do anything, basically running your power and providing your services for you and saving money on a daily basis. Again, we're blessed with a lot of sun in Alberta. For whatever reason, it's taken us a little bit longer to identify that. But I do feel that the trend, and in conversations like we're having today, are going to change the landscape and probably impactful here in the next short term. Obviously, with the shift in costs and the direction of our federal government, which it looks like we're in for the foreseeable future, there's going to be some challenges for our cost of energy, specifically in Alberta. So I think it's wise for us all to kind of just sit back and identify that change is coming. As everybody knows, in order to be successful in business, we have to adapt to the climate and change with it. There's some other farms are, I don't want to say old school, maybe a little bit old fashioned, but they're reluctant to change, and I receive that and I understand that. But unfortunately, we're faced with the reality that we have to make some hard decisions, and that this unfortunately is one of them. So with that, I will open it up to some questions and go from there.
Yeah, I'm just going to check the chat box and see if there's any questions that went in there during the presentation. But if anybody has any questions, please just unmute yourself and speak up while I'm checking here in the chat.
Yeah, I have some chat ones as well.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
So how long do the solar panels typically last, and do they withstand the Alberta hailstorms?
Good questions. Again, it varies on the panel, to be honest with you, but a simple answer is the panels that we supply would have a warranty of 25 years. So the full warranty would be 10. The extended warranty, or the manufacturer's warranty, will take you to 25 years. And what that warranty up to 25 will provide you is a guarantee of degradation rate not less than X. So I believe they have a degradation rate of 0.012%. So to summarize that number, basically they're guaranteeing us that in 25 years, if we're producing 100 units of power at the beginning, that we will still be producing 89% of that or 88% of that after 25 years. So that is still fairly strong. The panels themselves, I explained to somebody the other day, the technology in solar panels, it changed immensely about 7 years ago. And I think we all remember those big TVs that we had with the tube on the back. I remember my father walking with one, almost killing himself. He was so proud of this thing, but you could barely carry it. When we went to flat screens, that was a huge jump. And that's what happened with solar probably about 7 years ago. Have those TVs gotten better over the last several years? They have, but the jump has been minuscule. There's been slight adjustments, slight improvements, but the big jump happened about 7 years ago. On hail, we're happy to say that those panels will take a good punch. They're rated to take, a golf ball, I think about 90 kilometers an hour as a direct hit. We had several panels installed up in Sandstone, which is northeast Calgary. It was a $1 billion hailstorm that went through there. I believe it was last summer, and we didn't have any panels that were damaged from that storm. There was a lot of roofs, sides of houses were completely gone, but the panels themselves will take a fairly good punch. The majority of the largest reason for that is obviously typically hailstorms come in from the north and will strike from the north or northeasterly. Panels for the most part are faced southwesterly, easterly, but we kind of avoid the major brunt of a lot of those storms. I see a question from Grant. Can we install inverters and batteries in unheated buildings? Yes, it doesn't matter where they are. The inverters are rated for cold weather. Batteries, obviously, as we all know, batteries have degradation rates that change in the cold climate. There was a national global energy show, I believe it was in Dubai, and I believe it was last year, and there was a company out of Alberta that showcased a new product, or I guess a new advancement as far as battery technology. The typical battery, I believe it was in the 60 to 65% retention, and they were showing numbers in the 90s. I don't believe that we're there yet as far as a cost to make it practical, but we can be encouraged that that technology is moving forward. Obviously, Elon Musk has got, a large stake in the game. He's experimenting with new battery technology, obviously, as we speak. So I believe batteries will come probably full circle here in the next little bit. I see from Robert, can panels be put on a building that's hooked up to the power grid, or are there limitations from the main pole? No, again, you're looking at trenching, obviously, which is going to run some cost. But no, we don't need to be right next to the main power pole. In some of these rural instances, we do have to run the panels quite a distance to attach to the grid. Fallon, when you say that you can only produce what you use on a yearly basis, is there a penalty? No, there's not. Fallon, what we will have to do is when we apply for our microgen, we will have your site ID number attached to that application. So again, using round numbers, if you use 100 units a year, and in a particular year, if you produce 105 units, no, there's no penalty for that. What they're trying to avoid is people putting in systems that will generate 120 units when they only use 100. They will not allow us to put a microgen application in on a project like that.
I had a question. I didn't seem to come through on the chat, but due to the recent power outages, can a homeowner still have continuous power if they have a solar installation already up and running? Or will their system have some sort of problem if there's a system-wide power outage?
That is a phenomenal question. And I actually have that flagged. There was an article that was released on May 22nd, and it actually reads, grid regulator warns of supply chain related power outages this summer. So from my understanding, and forgive me for not being all knowing, I believe that we will still be able to supply power if there is an outage, but I would have to see, I'll have to clarify that, to be honest with you, Susanna, but they are starting to warn. And in this article, they do mention Alberta, which was quite surprising to me, but they did mention in Alberta that could be a potential. We broke records last summer. Obviously, everybody was here. I didn't have air conditioning last summer, but I certainly have it now. And everybody that had it on, because we were, in my upstairs, it was 31 degrees, and try sleeping in that. That is challenging.
Yeah.
So everybody, we maxed our grid out. And again, that the costs are reflective in that, but our grid is being tested. I think, and again, I'm a weather forecaster, but it looks like we're in for another warm one this summer. The farmers, depending on who you listen to, are bracing for a few years of some drier conditions. So we have to be aware that that's a potential. So Susanna, I will get your information, or I will find that answer and send it off to you. My contact information is on that form. If you'd like to send me an email, I can speak specifically to that.
Yes, because in what was happening or is happening still in Ontario and Quebec. And I know people down there and they have been without power. And those that have had generators that run on natural gas are okay. And they're helping out their neighbors. But I was just curious how that would match to solar energy.
I'm fairly certain, Susanna, that it will still provide power, because like during a sunny day today, if your air conditioner is running, that power is coming directly into your house. So it is not going outside and then coming back in. So I'm fairly safe to say that it will, but I will confirm that with you.
Yes, I would really appreciate that. And also, like,
sure.
would you, in that circumstance, would you turn off you wouldn't want any power going back into the grid because the grid would not be functioning. So is there a way, if you have a solar panel installation, to stop that energy going back into the grid if the grid is not functioning?
The only instance where it would go back in is if you're not using it. And I don't believe that you can, the energy has to go somewhere. So in order to turn it off, that energy has to be released somewhere. So you would want it to go back in. But again, good question. I will confirm that.
Okay, I would really appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, great
I'm gonna go back
question.
up. Robert asked how efficient are panels during the winter with cloud coverage. Well, again, we get obviously less sun hours. Cloud is not excellent. It will impact. We have some programs that were installed, a couple of years back that were affected by the smoke cover from those BC fires, and your production will drop. It will not diminish to nothing. As far as cold, solar panels prefer cold weather. They're not as efficient as optimized. That under 95 degrees Fahrenheit is where they optimally run. So the hotter days, in Arizona and those areas, they're not getting the full production of those panels as we would in a climate like ourselves. Fallon, again, also to this, cover all connection fees where you're producing your own power. But at the end of the year, you actually pay zero. No, Fallon, unfortunately, we can never get away from full T&D, transmission and distribution. Distribution is what they charge us, as well as those admin fees to pay for the infrastructure and for the privilege to tie into the grid. If you're looking to go completely off grid, it's possible. By all means, it's possible, but it would come with an expense. You would need some battery backup and some other things as well. Anton has asked, Alberta government is proposing changes to microgeneration plants. How will these impact solar? I hate to say we don't know yet. We've been assured that our microgen agreements will be secure. So if we have a microgen now, that we'll continue to be able to sell that power back into the grid. I don't know if that was the question you had. We don't know exactly going forward what those changes are. We know what some of their proposals are. I've become a little bit of an adjudicator with the government. I've made some inquiries, and I kind of find it's like mom and dad. If you don't get the answer you want, you go ask the other, because there's not a lot of clarity when you call in a lot of times. So we're trying to get, solidify some better relationships within those groups that we get concrete answers. Right now, I don't believe that they know. I think obviously there's going to be a little bit of a shift in our political landscape in the near future. But solar, from what I understand, from the Alberta government standpoint, is no longer a bad word. Obviously, oil and gas has been our bread and butter, but out of Jason Kenney's mouth, not too long ago, he does feel and agrees that we need to have a bilateral approach to our energy solutions. And he specifically spoke on solar. I know the NDP government, put some programs in place that helped, offset some of the cost. And in essence, what they were doing for all those people that are upset that they didn't get that rebate, and there was several customers of ours that were very upset. Oh, I didn't get it. We applied for numerous, and not everybody received it. Rest assured, you're not out that money. What they were in a lot of cases were doing is they were pre-buying your credits. So if there was $100,000 grant and it was a percentage of your install cost, it was up to $100,000. that $100,000 you will recoup throughout the duration of your system by selling those credits back. It's not dollar for dollar, but it's pretty close. We are not aware of any programs. The discussions I've had with the provincial government is they have, there's no dialogue right now as far as to subsidize solar. Again, to be completely honest with everybody on the call, we kind of needed it to make financial sense several years ago at 5 cents a kilowatt. We kind of needed it, that incentive to kind of show a financial, picture that made sense. Today, I don't need it. I would almost prefer that the government not do it because it creates a lot of confusion, creates some queues, some lineups.
Yeah.
We don't need that financial assistance anymore in order to show the benefits. And not just from a climate standpoint. There's several on the call that want to do it, and I'm not judging, but they want to do it because it's the right thing to do. They want to lessen their carbon footprint, and I have nothing but respect for that. But a lot of others are going to be forced to make these decisions because it financially makes sense. And it's nice to have the benefit of both. For those that didn't want that climate offset and, really couldn't afford to do it, now that conversation has changed dramatically. It's now become a financial decision, not just an ethical one. Joan has asked, if the solar system falls short of producing enough power for a farm, can it be supplemented by another source? It's a good question. I believe the answer is yes. I don't know why it would fall short of producing enough power. If you don't have enough space, if it's a roof mount, then yes, you could. But the other source, I believe you can have multiple microgen agreements as long as you're not overproducing. But again, that's something I can look into as well, Joan. If you want to send me a note, I will get you some clarity on that. Glenda, in an area prone to lots of dust from road traffic and blowing from farmers' field, is that a serious concern? Yes and no. It'll lessen your production, but not dramatically. We tell the farms specifically, take your power washers out once a year and give them a good dust off. Typically, with the rain and snowfall we get, it gives it a decent rinse, but it never hurts to go out there and pay a little bit extra attention to them. Another question that we have often is, when the panels are covered with snow and we're locked up, do we still produce? The answer is no, we don't. But that's okay, because if you look at a south-facing roof or a black truck, which I drive, it's the first thing to melt in even a -30 day with any sun. It creates almost a hot plate kind of a scenario. So those panels will probably melt before anything else because it is generating a heat source. But you will lose some production if you do have some dust, but not enough of any consequence.
I'm just going to throw your email, Richard, into the chat box for those people that were going to reach out to you.
Okay.
Do you want to just double check that
I just am right now. Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to Richard and you have more questions that maybe come up after you've had some time to process everything we've talked about today, feel free to email Richard. You're okay to get emails from all of us, Richard?
Oh, you betcha.
Yeah.
No, I did. Yeah, you bet. And again, we've been working with the rural community. This has been my specific area for probably 3 years now. We've seen a lot of growth in that area. We saw a lot of pain, unfortunately, last year with the drought. I think some of them have adjusted for, the possibility that we might have another repeat. We always say that we're hoping for rain. Certain areas of the province have got more than others. I'm having a garage sale this weekend, so you can thank me for the rain on Saturday, because it is going to pour. So my son's I don't think he's going to be able to sell all of his Lego like he'd hoped. So I think his trip to Disneyland is canceled. But yeah, we're expecting some showers. And again, it's unfortunate, but I think we are in a little bit of a climate shift. My father was raised on a farm, and they talk about the dirty 30s when there was nothing but dust. So the world will do what the world does, and we have to make adjustments. There's nothing we can really do. Those of you that have pivots, obviously there's a cost associated with that, but feel fortunate you have access to water. But again, just be wary of those, be aware, I guess, of the expense of running those. And there are options to help offset that. And solar is a viable option. We're just not smoke and mirrors anymore. It's not snake oil. Canada was probably one of the slowest nations to adopt solar. If you go over to Europe, there's solar panels everywhere. They're doing it because it works. You know, the biggest indicator for me from a business standpoint is we have companies from all over the world, Ontario, everywhere, European companies coming to invest in our province for solar. So if I don't think they know something we don't, but if they're prepared to put their money in and sell it at a less rate that we can use it as a microgen user, as a specific user, we'd be foolish not to take a hard look at this. We really would. And I'm not trying to say that as a hard sell, because it's, for some people, will not be a fit. You know, some of the people we talk to just will not do it. They just don't believe in it, and that's fine. Like, if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. But I think we need to look at a new reality of where we are in the energy cycle. And unfortunately, we don't make the rules, but we have to play by them. And if we follow the news as close as I do, and I've got pages of articles, everybody should look at this one. That's my buddy there. So I'm sorry, I wasn't going to get political, but he's specifically speaking on farms and the emissions and the high usage. We're going to get targeted, and maybe not unfairly, because we are high users. But let's get ahead of that and create an offset where we can show that we've got a renewable source. So that'll change the direction of that conversation down the road.
Totally. Yeah. And what is it about garage sales? They always bring the rain.
I don't know. I probably washed my truck too, and that's probably not going to help. But
Yeah.
70% chance. So I don't know. I've canceled it twice. I'm going for it anyway. So if anybody needs some stuff that I don't want, I think the highest item, at the end of the day, come at the end, I'm just going to give it away anyway. Don't tell anybody that.
There you go. Top tips.
Yeah,
Perfect.
everything must go.
Does anyone else have any questions? We're here. You can either pop them in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. I'll just give it a few more seconds here. So speak now or hold your peace. I think that's good.
Okay.
I don't see anyone. Oh, thank you. Great talk. Thanks, Susanna. Yeah, great questions as well. Thank you for asking the questions that you did.
And there's, just to say that there's no dumb questions. Solar is fairly new. You know, a lot of people don't even understand the application of where it's a fit and where it's not. As I said, the landscape has changed immensely. You know, when I started having these conversations with certain farms, it just did not make sense at 5 cents a kilowatt. I just could not make the numbers work. But those days are gone. I'm starting to sound like my dad. You know, I remember when, you know, we could get a 5.2 cents a kilowatt. You know, in my home, I think my latest round of contract, I think I'm at 6.8, and that's a good number. There are some 8s out there. So, you know, obviously the landscape has changed, and it's going to continue to increase going forward, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I see a lot of thank yous in the chat box for you, Richard. And there's a comment from Fallon asking if she can email you for a quote.
Yeah, absolutely. Just send off your specifics, and I'll call you. I'll need to get some site information, and then we can go. We're out on the road quite a bit. I'm actually we're on the road quite a bit. So I don't know near where you'll be, but I can certainly do it remotely as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again. Lots of great comments about your presentation. Very informative. Thanks for your time, Richard. And I hope everyone on the call tonight has a wonderful evening. And yeah, I'll be sending out an email shortly when we have this recording up on our YouTube. And we can pass along Richard's contact info again to all of you, just in case you missed it on the call today. Okay.
I'll see you all at the garage sale.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay.
Thank you all.